Welcome back, everybody. The next section that we pick up begins with, what does Raja think? Raja, this parrot who's been living a very, very long time, who seems to have learned a lot of things. So we'll begin with that. This is getting interesting, said Raja. We help an old man who stole the Jaguar break out of jail in Mexico City. We convince him to let us borrow the Jaguar and come all the way across the country to the Yucatan Peninsula so that we can sell it back to that creep, the Pasha. Now we're going to steal it back from the Pasha and finally pay him back for what he did to Pablo. Yeah, something like that, said Remesio, a distant tone in his voice. The outdoor cafe was busy, and nobody seemed to notice that a man and a parrot were having serious discussion. Remesio finished writing on the roll of very strong masking tape he had been busy with. He nodded his head, satisfied. He showed it to Raja, who had no reaction. After 500 years of living, nothing much surprised the ancient parrot. The tape went into Remesio's knapsack next to the Mayan calendar he had stolen to make his initial impression on the Pasha. The handcuffs he and One-Eye Felipe had used in the Mexico City jail joined the tape and calendar. I think it was fate when I found the Pasha in Mexico City, said Remesio. I've thought about that scum a lot over the last 12 years. This is my chance to get back at him, and I'm not going to blow it. Yeah, I gotta hand it to you, Remy. The last guy I knew that could carry a grudge that long was Edward Teach. Edward Teach? Yeah, his friends called him Eddie, but his enemies, and he had a few, mind you, called him Blackbeard. The guy was the king when it came to frightening his enemies or his victims. I guess it depends on how you look at it. Raja sighed longingly. Those are some good times. I really learned to like the sea. You knew Blackbeard, the pirate? Asked Remesio skeptically. Was he as bad as they say? Eddie? Maybe yeah, maybe no. I can't always figure people out. People thought he was a bad man because that's what he wanted them to think. He was the master. Whenever we pulled up to another ship, he would stick matches in his beard. Then he would light them and let them smolder. When with all that smoke floating around his head and that bellowing voice of his, he would scare the living daylights out of most of the sailors. He looked like the devil come to do battle. The fights were usually over before they ever started. Mental warfare is what he called it. Sometimes just hoisting that flag of his was all it took. Nah, he wasn't too bad a guy as far as people go, but he did carry his grudges. Yeah, it was greed that did him in. Same old story. Remesio didn't like the comparison. Raja, do you think I'm like Blackbeard? Let's just say you would have made a good first mate on board his ship, the Queen Anne's Revenge. Revenge is exactly what I want. I'll admit I've been outside the law for a long time, but I'm a thief. That's what I do. That's how I survive. It's a hard, uncaring world that can destroy all you hold dear in a matter of seconds. Still, Don, and for our readers, ding, 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 that's a term of respect. When someone puts Don before a name, it's like Mr. or along those terms, but in Spanish language, it's a term of respect. So back to the story, ding, ding. Still, Don Octavio Chotec Sanchez reminded me that things do have a value other than money. Culture and tradition were what he talked about. I haven't looked at it that way for a long time. I remember one of the last things my brother Rose said to me. Everything man-made has a history. It has to. Was the old man trying to tell me the same thing? You think my dead friend Pablo would have thought protecting culture and tradition would be more important than money? Well, if he had grown up differently, he might have, suggested Raja. Pablo got greedy. Greed's an infection. It eventually kills the people it infects, and it forgets about them quickly. Remesio looked despondently at his coffee. He was not given to doubting himself, but he seemed to have more questions than answers. He was still sure about one thing, though. The Pasha was going to get his. Raja, you know what to do. I'll be up there in a little bit, waiting for your cue. Remesio watched his parrot fly back up towards the Pasha's hotel room. Pablo was no angel, he thought, but he was my friend. Ding, ding. And now we're going to take another little flashback, because we got to learn about this guy, Pablo Morales, and why he's so important to Remesio. So we're going to take you back. We've talked about flashbacks, and it's a way to fill in some parts of a story that are missing. And as we read this next part, titled The Story of Pablo Morales and the Turning of Remesio Treviso, I want you to think about what that means, the turning of Remesio Treviso. Because I've been asking you all along the way, what turns someone into a thief? What hardens somebody like this? And I think you're starting to pick up the pieces on this already. But let's see what happens at this point. Ding, ding, back to the story. The first time the 12-year-old Remesio saw Pablo Morales, rain was coming down hard. It was a Saturday afternoon, just around siesta time, and he and Raja were standing in the doorway of a closed shop, wondering what they were going to do for food. They had just arrived in Caracas, Venezuela, after walking and hitchhiking for over a month after the disaster at Minas Nuevas. They had planned to find the conference center where his parents were to have given their presentation to the World Bank. Maybe someone there could help him, but he wasn't sure where the conference center was, and besides, nothing would be open until Monday. But Remesio was tired, broke, and extremely hungry. He sat down in the doorway of a closed shop and decided to sleep until the rain stopped. And then he'd find a way to get some food. As he sat in the doorway, he could make out a figure running towards him through the heavy raindrops. Something hit Remesio's shoulder as the figure raced by, splashing water on him. "Keep this till I get back," the speeding figure shouted. Remesio peeked around the doorway corner and saw a kid, 16 years old, he guessed, duck into an alley. He got up, curious, and examined the thin packet the boy had thrown at him. He didn't open it, but instead, and perhaps instinctively, put it in his back pocket. "Get rid of that, Remy," urged Raja. "I've seen this type of thing before, and I'm telling you, there's trouble if we stick around." No sooner had Raja finished speaking than they got splashed again, this time by two oversized policemen who ran all the way to the corner and stopped abruptly, gasping for breath. They had not seen where the boy had turned. Remesio saw their shoulders rising and falling as they talked to each other. One ended up throwing his hat on the wet ground and the other throwing his arms up in frustration. They walked back to Remesio, who hoped they hadn't noticed him sitting in the doorway. "Hey, did you see that kid come by?" they demanded. But Remesio instinctively covered his back pocket with his hand. He wasn't sure why, but he hoped he wasn't being too obvious. I lost him at the corner," he replied. Raja just squawked. "Rah!" The policeman studied them for a moment, but Remesio didn't blink. One of the cops swore, muttered something about homeless children, and said they might as well get out of the rain. Remesio watched them walk off while he slid down the wall and resumed his sitting position in the doorway. He breathed a heavy sigh of relief and settled in for a wait, eventually falling asleep. Raja flew to a nearby tree to study the neighborhood and to keep an eye on Remesio, who was proving to be a very interesting human. "Wake up!" Remesio's eyes opened. He noticed that the rain had stopped. Standing in the doorway was the kid the police had been chasing. He was bigger than Remesio had first thought. "You still have it?" he asked, with folded arms and a warning look in his eye. But Remesio got to his feet and wiped his eyes. He had been sleeping very hard. The city street had come back to life, and the smell of chicken and onions being fried at a corner food stand reminded him that he had gone to sleep hungry. He handed the packet to the boy, looking him straight in the eye. The older boy looked down both sides of the street and then opened the packet. He pulled 4 gold necklace chains from it, letting the packet float into the street. One necklace he would keep, the other 3 he would sell. He always stole jewelry in 4s. "You did the smart thing," he said, extending his hand and smiling a wonderful smile. "My name is Pablo Morales." He said it as if it were the name of a king. The 2 boys shook hands, and Pablo learned Remesio's story. When Pablo got some chicken for Remesio as a way of saying thank you, Remesio noticed the vendor would not take the money Pablo offered him. And when he asked Pablo about it, the older boy just winked. You've had some very bad luck, Remesio, but today you're lucky. Today you made a strong friend. Everyone here knows Pablo Morales. Remesio learned that Pablo was the head of a street gang known locally as Los Ratones, the Mice. They were a loosely held together band of homeless and near homeless kids who made their living on the mean streets of Caracas, Venezuela. Many of them couldn't read or write, but they were plenty street smart. To survive, they made money in many different ways. One simple way to make money was to charge people to protect their cars. If the people refused to pay, well, a hubcap might go missing or a windshield might get cracked. If they paid, nothing happened. Most people in that neighborhood paid. If someone they perceived to be rich was walking down the street, they would pretend to be sick or have a bum leg or just be hungry, anything to get a sympathy donation. Sometimes they would steal and sell whatever it was to Pablo, who would give them a fair price and then turn around and sell it for more money to someone else. Or, if they were lucky, they got to run numbers for the local lottery game, making little money, a few centavos, on every ticket they sold. No matter how the ratones made their money, Pablo got a piece of it. In return, he kept his eyes open and protected his friends and family. Pablo was the point man for the lucrative lottery, and a kid could only sell lottery numbers if Pablo gave the say-so. This was Pablo's neighborhood, and everything worked two ways. You helped Pablo, and Pablo helped you. He had become the leader of the Ratones by being more clever, more daring, and tougher than the rest. Of course, Pablo had to answer to people too. Pablo sold lottery tickets for a man known as the Pasha. It was Pablo's responsibility to make a correct accounting of every number the Ratones sold during the week. This was serious business because lots of money was involved and a lot of people depended upon it. If one of the Ratones ever stole money he was supposed to turn in, Pablo dealt with him quickly and severely. Pablo had to make up any losses or differences out of his own pocket, or else the Pasha would do even worse to him. Pablo despised the fat Pasha, but he respected the money, and he was good at math. Ding, ding, ding. Here's a little stop now. A lot of you know about Powerball and lottery tickets. You can buy them in gas stations everywhere now. That wasn't always the case. A long time ago, numbers were not always something that was done above board. And back in this day and age, back in this time, when Remesio's 12 years old in Caracas, Venezuela, it could be a very underground kind of game that people played. But it's much like the one that's played today that everyone buys tickets and it helps pay for certain things we want. So we're basically saying gambling's okay because we think it's going to help pay for some things. It wasn't always like that. Ding, ding, ding. Back to the story. The weekly lottery, or numbers game, was played by thousands of people in Caracas. They would pick any three-digit number and buy a ticket from one of the Ratones, or even other gang members in other parts of the city, for whatever money they wished to bet. And that number would be recorded and a receipt would be given. If their number came up, they would receive a payout of perhaps 500 times the value of the ticket. It was always big news when someone hit the number. If you bet $50, you could win $25,000. But most people just bet $1 or $2. The winning number was determined by the winning horses in the first 3 Sunday races at the horse track in the city of Caracas. There were always 9 horses in each of those races. If horse number 2 won the first race, horse number 8 won the second race, and horse number 4 won the third race, the winning number would be 284 for that week. The results were always published in the sports section of the Monday newspaper so people could easily verify if they were the winners. Pablo would personally pay and congratulate the winners who had bought their tickets from the Ratones, and the tip often found its way into his pocket. It was always good for business when someone hit the number because more people would play the following week. All bets had to be in on Friday night before anybody knew which horses were running in which position on Sunday. That way, nobody could pick numbers based on the good horses. Though the numbers game was illegal, it appeared to be run honestly. And when you're a thief, appearances can be very important. If nobody hit the number, the Pasha got to keep everything he collected, minus expenses, of course. The payout for the next week, however, would increase slightly and continue that way every week until someone hit the number. The higher payouts would encourage more people to purchase numbers. The more numbers that were sold meant more money for Pablo, the Ratones, and especially the Pasha, who kept the largest share. The Pasha almost always made money on this because he would collect more money than he had to pay out. The odds of hitting a 3-digit number were 729 to 1. Those were all the numbers between 111 and 999, minus all numbers with 0, since no racing horse was numbered 0, and all numbers that repeat. For example, a horse race can't finish 111. In theory, for every $729 he collected, he would only pay out $500, thus making a profit of $229. When thousands of people played, the money added up quickly. It was a rare thing if more than 1 or 2 people had the winning number for the week, but it did occasionally happen. It was more rare still if someone bet over $1. In any case, the Pasha would grimace and pay the winners, sometimes from his own pocket. People wouldn't play if they thought they wouldn't get paid. In the long run, though, the Pasha always made money. The Pasha had other people he needed to keep happy, too. This game, after all, was illegal, and it was big. There were 10 other Pablos in 10 other neighborhoods that sold numbers for the Pasha. He had to pay local authorities a lot of money to look the other way and to keep other ambitious criminals from moving in on his action. By that first Saturday night, Pablo had introduced Remesio to many of the Ratones. They immediately accepted Remesio as one of themselves and bragged to him about their exploits on the streets, each one explaining the different and daring ways they made money. The Ratones were so named for a reason. When the police swept through the neighborhood, the Ratones would scatter like mice. And when the police came through on that Sunday morning, everybody scattered in typical Raton fashion, except the Remesio. He did what any smart Shantaya would do when in danger. He disappeared. Actually, he really blended into his surroundings, but the Ratones were amazed, especially Pablo, who explained to Remesio how a smart thief could use such a talent. That Sunday, Remesio stole for the first time in his life. They made for the Central Market, where he effortlessly stole a very nice but very practical leather jacket. And from this new experience, Remesio learned 2 things. He was good at stealing, and he liked how it made him feel alive. Raja simply kept his beak shut and offered no advice, content to watch how things would develop. This was not new to him. He had seen much worse. That Monday, Remesio was no longer interested in going to the conference center in search of help. He and Raja had found a home with the Ratones. Ding, ding. That's the end of this part. And now I just want to bring you back a little bit. If you click on your link to Venezuela, or Caracas, Venezuela, you saw a picture of the city, which is basically divided into 2 very stark sections. So you might want to go back and look at that. And it's basically, you can almost see this big street running down between the city neighborhoods. On one side, it's like incredible poverty. And the other side looked pretty wealthy and well-to-do in that picture on that link. I want you to think about that. Right now, Caracas, Venezuela is perhaps one of the most dangerous cities in the world. And that is where Remesio had ended up being adopted by the Ratones. And in the end of this section, we talk about how stealing made Remesio feel alive. And we know that he was almost lost for a while there after watching his brother Ro go over the dam. And I want you to think about turning and what happens to people and how they become thieves and maybe how they can make better decisions. So that's the end of this section. Be sure to click on the links, do the bold words, do a good job.